Thank you guys for coming out today. We're going to kick things off with Jack Sellers. So Jack Sellers has been active in the community and in the region with a strong interest in economic development and transportation issues. He served as a member and chair of the Chandler Transportation Commission and chaired the Chandler Transportation Bond Committee. Mr. Sellers is a member of Arizona Town Hall and has served as a board member and participated in four town halls, twice as a delegate and twice as a panel leader. He is also a member of the Arizona-Mexico Commission, where he serves on the Transportation Committee. He also chairs the Transportation Committee of the East Valley Partnership, in addition to serving on the Economic Development and Government Relations Committees. He has a bachelor's degree in engineering from New Mexico State University. So please join me in welcoming Jack Sellers.
Microphone working?
What'd you say?
We can hear you in front of that.
What?
Which one of these do I press to get everything? Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
As you all know, Arizona is an established leader in promoting intelligent transportation solutions. Last month, our governor established the Arizona Self-Driving Car Institute with ASU, U of A, NAU, the Arizona Department of Transportation, the Arizona Department of Public Safety, the Arizona Commerce Authority, and Intel as participants. Intel, with their subsidiary Mobileye, is initially the only private sector partner, but others will be added. We're blessed to also have Waymo and General Motors, both operating here in Chandler. The major goal of this institute is to pool knowledge to overcome obstacles that will allow us to establish best practices and maximize safety. We've also started the Smart Region Initiative, which will be a consortium of public and private partners with a goal of stimulating technology innovation. I'll be attending the kickoff summit of that next Thursday, November 15th. Okay, brief project update. The South Mountain Freeway, which is a design, build, maintain contract for the entire 22 miles, is 70% complete now, with opening before the end of next year. Planning for I-10 improvements on the 2 lane segments between here and Casa Grande and State Route 347 between I-10 and Maricopa has started. With M.A.G coordinating the study along with the Gila River Indian Community, Arizona Department of Transportation, and that is expected to be completed within 18 months. It's really very encouraging to finally be moving forward on addressing these critical projects along with our Indian community partners. We've talked before about new reversible lanes on I-17 between Black Canyon City and Sunset Point, and that's in the 5-year plan, 2019 to 2023. All right, now I'm going to move to funding issues. The top priority for us here in the East Valley is identifying and getting our critical transportation needs included in Prop 500, which is what we're calling an extension of Prop 400 that expires in 2025. So the reason we're working on that now is because we need to define a plan within the next 2 years and be ready to market our plan for a public vote in 2022. The first step in this process is to get legislative approval that allows our county supervisors to refer an initiative to the ballot. We came close to getting that approval last year, and we'll be working on it again in the 2019 session. Some concerns as we develop a plan. We're seeing cost increases due to labor shortages, material cost increases, lead cost increases, and project changing to address local needs. Some recent bids have come in 15 to 30% over estimates. So we've got a lot of work to do to ensure that we have a workable plan going forward. And we still need to address potential statewide transportation funding issues not covered by our regional Prop 500 that are important links for our economic future, and preferably do this with user-based fees. You've all heard me talk a lot before. Reminder that a gas tax of 10 cents a gallon, that's around $400 million a year, costs the average motorist $5 a month. Of course, we recognize that as we move to more and more electric vehicles, we'll need to address longer-term plans. At least this would cover us for what we're trying to accomplish today. One step in addressing our transportation infrastructure needs is that recent legislation now allows our ADOT director to change vehicle license fees. These fees will be used to support the Department of Public Safety and consequently, at least hopefully, stop the higher way use of revenue fund sweeps. Planning in the East Valley needs to recognize the importance of improving multimodal infrastructure, including the Gateway Airport, to ensure that we can take full advantage of the Skybridge project. Perhaps a direct rail connection could be included with a commuter rail, could be included with commuter rail and play a significant role in connecting the Gateway Airport and Sky Harbor in our region. And you're going to hear a presentation on commuter rail here in a bit. But the nice thing about commuter rail is that it's much less expensive than light rail because it uses existing right-of-way and in many cases the existing rail. The transit plan becomes more important as we increase population densities, and it becomes more viable with the first and final mile provided by autonomous vehicles. And in case you don't know, this particular vehicle is being manufactured right here in Chandler. So I'm excited to be involved in this transportation revolution, and I thank you, and I'll entertain any questions.
Introduce our next speaker.
So our next speaker today is going to be Audra Koester Thomas. A proud graduate of Texas A&M University, Audra became active in public policy as an intern for a Texas congressman. After serving in Washington, D.C., Audra earned graduate degrees in public administration and political science from the University of Houston. Audra joined the Maricopa Association of Governments in 2015 to facilitate long-range transportation planning efforts for the nation's second largest metropolitan planning organization. Previously, Audra worked for Partners for Strategic Action, a Fountain Hills-based community planning firm. Audra grew up on a family farm in southeastern Minnesota, fostering her interest in agriculture and natural resource policy issues. Audra's specialties include governance and public policy, organizational leadership, strategic planning, and land use and transportation planning. It is my pleasure to welcome Audra Koester Thomas.
My name is Audra Koester Thomas. I'm pleased to be here with you this morning. I am excited to share a little bit, it's great dovetailing off of Jack's presentation, talk a little bit about the extension of Prop 400, actually talk a little bit about the existing Proposition 400, where we're heading, and then take a few minutes to talk specifically on commuter rail, which is an interest here in this, this region. Some of you in this room have seen a couple bits of this presentation, so I apologize already. But please interrupt me at any point in time. I want it to be casual. I know that there's already been some interest in the commuter rail component, so I don't let me get off of a slide if you have a question or want to talk a little bit more about that. We are already in the midst of planning for our next regional sales tax extension. As Jack had indicated, collections for Proposition 400, our 20-year asset sales tax will expire or stop being collected at the end of 2025. And we'll want a renewal. Obviously, we're the fastest growing county in the country again. Our work is not yet done. Observation made about the maintenance and operations funding for the capital infrastructure for which we've invested in already. There will be multimodal transportation needs long into the future, and so we're already in the planning midst. We're calling our next regional transportation plan M.A.G, in part because of the topics we've already discussed today. tons of transportation innovation for which we don't necessarily know what the consequences may be. Thinking 20 years ahead, I'm not certain we have a really clear picture of what 20 years ahead look like. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to be a little bit more nimble and creative, actually, in long-range planning. And it'll be a challenge, actually, for us, a little bit different than what we've done in the past. We use a lot of acronyms in our industry, and so before I get caught not defining them, I'm going to start off right away. MPO, or a Metropolitan Planning Organization. M.A.G, Maricopa Association of Governments, is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, basically for Central Arizona. We're the second largest geographically sized metropolitan planning organization in the country, so we have a huge span, not just Maricopa County, but we sweep and include city of Maricopa over to the town of Florence, including the Gila River Indian community, and kind of up through the A.J. area. And so we have a really large geographic planning area. We're also very large in terms of our population. Regional transportation, and our responsibilities, might I add, are to program federal funds for transportation. About 50 years ago, 60 years ago, Congress was noticing that a lot of funding coming down through the DOT to states was disproportionately being Congress didn't like that and wanted to make sure that we're the fastest growing parts of the state's metropolitan centers, where there are really transportation needs, ensure that there were funding going to them as well. And so our responsibilities, our chief business, our core business at M.A.G is transportation funding and long-range planning. We have to create an instrument to design where we're heading, 20 years down the road with those federal funds, and it's a regional transportation plan, or an RTP. It has to have at least a 20-year horizon, so we have to think long-term. It has to be fiscally constrained, meaning we have to have reasonable expectation for the projects that are funded in that program. We have to update it every 4 years, or at least every 4 years. And then, of course, Proposition 400, that's really the instrument that fuels investment here for transportation locally. Asset sales tax, it's the second iteration of that local sales tax. Back in 1985, in the early 80s, as this region was really fast growing, we had no high capacity transportation infrastructure at all. Some of you know that the I-10 portion coming here through the Phoenix area was the last portion of Interstate 10 completed in the country. Obviously, our mayors recognized that as a fast growing metropolitan area, we needed to get people around more efficiently, and came together with a unique solution at the time, which was establishing of a sales tax. Initially started as a conversation around property tax, and ultimately, after talking particularly to the business community, the sales tax was the proposition we landed on, and it was, again, a 20-year asset sales tax. Proposition 300 was build the freeways. That was the philosophy. We built our freeway network through Proposition 300. At the end of that 20-year horizon, we realized that we couldn't quite finish the freeway network that we had envisioned, and so we needed to finish the freeway network, but we needed to do more than that. And so Proposition 400, it really said, let's finish the loop system, including, of course, the South Mountain, which Jack already touched on today, but let's also add some transit. And the key component, of course, for Proposition 400 when it came to the transit, regional transit investment, is the light rail that came through. So what are we going to do for this next 20-year series of investments, and how are we going about planning for it? So I wanted to step back and give you a little bit of the same timeline that Jack provided. We're required by state statute to go to an election in a general election year. So that would mean as soon as 2020, which gives me nightmares, quite frankly, that's really soon. Or as late as 2024. That gets us on the eve of the renewal. We would have an opportunity, if we failed, to come back and fix that, and that's a problem in a lot of ways. But that being said, 2022 is kind of what we're considering our Goldilocks date. It's a really good planning horizon to be able to go through a process to finish technical study and work, get out and work with our community and stakeholders to understand that we're identifying a plan that's reflective of what our constituents value, and then ultimately prepare in time for an election. So I'll go briefly through this process, and then we'll talk about how commuter rail is a technical study that's going to be informing this effort. Right now we're in the foundational aspect, and a task we're conducting right now is called values mapping. And we intend to do this exercise to learn what's unique about this region so that we can build goals and objectives in our next regional transportation plan that are reflective to that. Because the one thing that we do know is that people make decisions, and make really big decisions when they're tied to their values. It's easy to talk about needs and needing other transportation investments, but when pushing comes to shove and we're asking folks to write checks for us, they're going to make decisions based on their values. So we're going through this exercise to understand what's special about this region so that we can tie the principal architecture of our next regional transportation plan around it. The other reason we're doing it is, as much as I'm going to use all kinds of acronyms and talk all kinds of really techie things today, at the end of the day, Grandma doesn't care about any of that. She doesn't know what the value of an added lane on the 202 means. She doesn't know what TI means. She doesn't care about ITS or the nuances of how our transportation system communicates with the arterial network, which ultimately includes DPS and moving traffic in an incident, right? She doesn't care about any of that. She cares about crossing the street safely with her grandson in the afternoon so they can play in the park, right? Or she cares about getting to her granddaughter's ballet performance by using alternative mode of transportation, right? Safely. So we've been challenged to develop a regional transportation plan that's people-focused, that focuses on what we really care about, right? Because she has to vote for the extension of Prop 400, right? And gizmos and gadgets aren't going to sell her, right? So this exercise that we're going through with values mapping is that we want to identify these shared values and priorities. We're doing that through a process of iterative conversations with groups, surveying, polling, big kinds of discussions. This is an example of one of these values map ladders that we'll be developing for this region. This one's from Utah. And the success in Utah for developing a statewide vision for transportation was built around this kind of an exercise. And through this sort of values mapping exercise, they were able to identify this shared value of happiness, which seems really big and audacious, for Utahns translates to higher quality of life, which really drives a value of time with family and friends, to do other things, to save money or be more affordable, which translates to less driving and spending time in commuting, which translated to a specific transportation investment of more public transportation options. That's how they built their plan, by going through this sort of exercise. We'll be doing the same. We'll be delivering that early next year. It will set the framework for the regional transportation plan. At that same time, we are doing a ton of technical study work. Jack touched on a few of them, including the I-10 expansion through the Gila River Indian community. We have a ton of technical studies going on at M.A.G. One of the first that we've been able to complete, however, is our commuter rail system study. It is a mode we have not, of course, invested in this region. We're probably the largest, aside from Houston, we're the largest metropolitan area that has not implemented a commuter rail mode investment in the country. And so it's something big to consider, right? And with that, I'll start talking a little bit more about commuter rail. Unique to this region, really, is how the railroad network lays out for us. As you see, it's kind of this cross, right? We have a line coming this way, south down here, the Kyrene line, and then out south of the I-10. And what's unique about that is it crisscrosses differently than our freeway network or our high-capacity highway network does. And what that enables is touching 18 community core centers or downtowns. There's no other mode of transportation we could build where we could connect 18 city cores or downtowns in this region, period. It's the only way we could do that. Why? Because a lot of our historic communities were built on rail lines, right? Couple differences between commuter rail and light rail. It is intended usually to be a commuter-based mode of transportation, right? So you're heading out from longer distances to get into city cores, right? And we do it during peak hour typically, right? So mornings and then evenings. Typically, commuter services are not all day. Some of our more dense populated areas on the East Coast have an all-day service, but it's infrequent. It's maybe once every hour or once every hour and a half throughout the day, but then several trains loaded in the morning and several trains loaded in the evening. Again, for commuter rail versus light rail, commuter rail is much longer distances. We're spanning a longer distance than light rail. Light rail is a very short distance, and that station stop is different. So for commuter rail, we're considering a stop every 3 to 7 or 10 miles, right? Long spanses to be efficient, right? To move that train fast over a course of a long distance. Light rail in this region, we have stops every half mile to a mile, really short distances, right? Light rail moves slower. As Jack already touched on, commuter rail, one of the benefits is we're in a partnership, right? A public-private partnership with the railroads, using their track and their infrastructure largely, whereas light rail is exclusive light rail, brand new kind of light rail within public right-of-way. Capital costs are much cheaper for commuter rail, again, because we're leveraging a public-private partnership with our rail community, as opposed to light rail, which is very exclusive investment up front. And then speed, as I've already touched on, commuter rail moves much faster as opposed to light rail. This is what a potential commuter rail system might look like in this region. You'll see it goes potentially all the way up to Wickenburg in our far Northwest Valley, potentially all the way down to Florence in our far Southeast Valley. Another note onto that, this system study is focused just on the M.A.G region, but we take into consideration ADOT's work on the intercity rail project, for which they completed now a couple years ago, actually, in connection with Tucson. It's this line right here that would be anticipated, if ever to be invested in, intercity rail between Phoenix and Tucson. But again, just to underscore and make Jack's life easier, there is no funding for intercity rail in Arizona. There's no funding available for highway expansion, system expansion in the state of Arizona, aside from local propositions like ours, right? There's barely enough money for basic preservation for the system, period. This system is 110 miles. Really neat network, large span. And what you'll see is we've integrated, wrong button. So we have one line that comes connecting the Wickenburg down to the Wild Horse Pass, so even getting across to Wild Horse Pass. This is the West Chandler connection right here. And then we have a kind of an east-west connection here. Unique aspects about this, from Queen Creek to downtown Phoenix is 34 minutes. There's no way you can do that aside from personal helicopter, right? You cannot get from Queen Creek to downtown Phoenix in 34 minutes. Wickenburg and Whitman, way up here, 33 minutes to downtown Phoenix. Coming out here from Buckeye to downtown, 34 minutes. Coming up from Wild Horse Pass to downtown Phoenix, 29 minutes. You'll see these are station placements. So again, not a ton of stations, right? But that's the beauty of why commuter rail works, is that you have fewer stations so the train can move faster and cover a lot more space. And ultimately, these are our initial modeling results, where we could have up to 21,000 boardings on an opening day. We think this is probably pretty conservative, quite frankly. Our modeling efforts are really focused, our models internally don't often pick up nuances of transit kinds of activities. And I'll particularly point out the low numbers down here. Santan Valley, for example, where our model can only pick up 20 people on a day to get down to downtown Phoenix, and I just can't believe that's true. I can't believe that there's not more people there, and it's because our network, our modeling network, can't pick up the catchment right now with how people get to that station. And so it's one of those technological flaws that we have to work on our end to make a more robust model to better understand how this network might play together. So if we did open on its first day, we would be in the top 10 highest productivity commuter rail systems in the country. And that's taken by average of passengers per mile. And so we'd be outdoing Salt Lake and being companion actually with the MARC train in Washington, D.C. So this is saying we could be very competitive. And why is that? Well, you know, we haven't implemented it yet, and we're one of the largest metropolitan regions. And so when you turn that kind of mode on, you see the saturation of the investment. Cost, right, at the end of the day. Per mile capital cost is $24 million. That is cheaper than light rail, right? So by a pretty decent factor, actually. However, I want to asterisk that, as mentioned earlier, that requires, of course, a partnership with our friends BNSF and Union Pacific, and that costs money, quite frankly. And so we have had an open dialogue, a very, very, very open dialogue with both of those rail companies, and they have been great partners on this study in particular. BNSF, which is that's the line that goes out to Whitman, they are much more friendly to passenger rail service and have hosted many a passenger rail service across the country. Union Pacific has been given a bad rap for not being good partners in passenger rail. We've found that we've had a really good and collaborative relationship with them. That being said, no one's written any checks yet, right, at the end of the day. And so that will take a lot of discussion, particularly around indemnity and liability. Because that's the big hiccup for them, is they want to be held harmless. Total system capital cost to implement that entire system I just indicated, $2.6 billion. That's a lot of money, right? That's a lot of money. It includes both adding new track in some of our denser areas, adding a second track to preserve operations for Union Pacific or BNSF. But a lot of times it includes shared service. It also includes improvements through some of our denser areas. Getting through Tempe will be tough, quite frankly. It may require a trench to be able to address some of our environmental jurisdiction or environmental justice issues and neighboring community issues. That's not cheap. It's expensive, right? Annual systems cost and operations, $41 million. Farebox recovery, we're estimating to be 36 to 40%, and that's a pretty conservative fare assumption. Commuter rail has a higher farebox recovery than a lot of other transit systems. We'd expect to beat that potentially with a good commuter rail investment. I'll move on, and if you come up with other questions, please don't hesitate to ask. So we have all these other technical studies. We have arterial bridge needs assessment, where we identify our grid network needs. We have 3 programs in our current proposition. One of them is the ALCP, Arterial Bridge Life Cycle Program, and Chandler has had a lot of funding for some of the projects you see here locally come out of that program. We heard loud and clear from our elected officials that particularly because of the HERF sweeps and funding not coming down and trickling through our traditional gas tax, that there's a huge need to be able to repair and maintain our arterial grid network, something that's of extreme value in this region. 50% of commuting trips use the arterial network, not our freeway system, right, to get around. And so we heard that loud and clear. We have to do a study on that. We have to identify what the operations and maintenance costs will be of our high capacity infrastructure, as Jack already indicated. There's going to be a need. We're seeing some of our original infrastructure need to be replaced. That I-17 segment is met its useful life, right? It's, heading up north and even through the core, it's met its useful life. And so we need to look at replacement in some cases, which will be new for this region, to actually go through that cycle of replacing, not just building new. And while in Proposition 300, the original agreement in the 80s, M.A.G took on the responsibility of building the infrastructure. We were going to take on the capital costs, and ADOT would maintain it. We haven't given any funding to ADOT to be able to maintain it, and I think we believe strongly there's value in maintaining the investment for which we've made. That's a big consideration. If M.A.G has to consider that in the extension of Prop 400, that eats up potential for investments like commuter rail, right? Because there's just trade-offs. There's just not enough money to cover it all. We'll be making those decisions with our policymakers, presenting all the technical information we have through this next year and into 2020, and then making some critical policy decisions about the trade-offs and values for this region for which we need to accommodate. We'll make and develop the plan over the course of the 2021 year and deliver a finalized plan by the end of that year in order to run it through our air quality conformity, make sure it meets federal guidelines, and then ultimately turn it over to an election cycle into 2022. We request ballot placement early that year, and then M.A.G steps away and a campaign ensues with an anticipated election, of course, in November of 2022. We have continuous public and stakeholder engagement. I've highlighted the values mapping exercise, but into spring we're going to be road showing this, our elected officials taking up opportunities to have conversations within their own community so we can start feeding information into this process alongside the technical work that we're doing, right? So that we're building this together, and so it's important to recognize those opportunities coming forward. So again, wrapping this up, what will the extension of Proposition 400 look like? I always like an excuse to show a picture of my daughter, Vivian. Long-range planning is hard, right? Long-range planning is hard because it's so far out there and takes strong leadership. Used to use the term or phrase, true leadership is planting a tree knowing you might not get to enjoy the shade, right? That's what long-range planning is. You have to make some tough decisions because what the decisions we're making today is making sure my daughter's daughter is going to choose this region to raise her family, right? Because we have a prosperous economy where she can thrive. And so at the end of the day, that's what it's all really about. We're making decisions for future generations. It's a really big responsibility, but we have to take it very seriously. So with that, concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Next speaker, I just want to make a comment. The reason we have these kinds of forums talking about transportation and education, Audra mentioned, is that it's super important for our city and our region that people are educated on what goes on. I think the gentleman brought up a really good point. If we take 12,000 people off the road every day, what does that do? The city right now is going through some challenges in some different areas where residents are concerned about traffic. And Audra made a really good point. Congestion isn't going to get any better. People want to move to Arizona, so our choices are either stop people from moving here, stop our economy, which isn't going to happen, or educate our residents to the fact that things cost money and we need to plan for the future. Without doing that, and Chandler's done a great job about thinking out in the future, but Colorado just had 2 propositions fail on transportation and road infrastructure funding, which is they were supported by the business community. People said no. So I think part of the chamber's responsibility, and that's why we do these, like I said, is to really educate people. And over the next several years, we're going to have a lot more of this kind of thing brought forward, so people can educate. So when you go back out to your businesses, go out to your community, you can really explain to them how important this whole plan is going to be. As Jack brought up, the state legislature, there's a few people up there who hate a certain version of transportation. So they wanted to take it out of the plan, so you can't do it. Well, it's local control. It's what Chandler needs, what Mesa's going to need, what Tempe's going to need, whatever it might be. So I just wanted to kind of bring that point up, and I will let Myra introduce.
Our final speaker for today is going to be Councilman-elect Matt Orlando. Matt Orlando is a 5-term council member for the city of Chandler. During his tenure as council member, he supported and led many activities and initiatives that benefited and laid the foundation for Chandler and its quality of life that the residents and business owners enjoy today. Specifically, police, fire, parks and recreation programs, neighborhood enhancement programs, and economic development opportunities. Through the years, Matt has developed a strong trust with his constituents. Matt was a small business owner and worked in large corporations and small companies, and understands their needs for infrastructure, an educated employee base, transportation corridors, and first-rate public safety. In his final role as the Director of Technical Sales at Honeywell, he was responsible for our $350 million product portfolio. He led a worldwide sales and business team of 26 people and directed successful business ventures in the United States and international markets. Matt has an MBA from Golden Gate University and a BA from Rutgers University. Please help me give a warm welcome to Councilman-elect Matt Orlando.
don't speak loud, you don't eat. Audrey, Jack, thank you very much. I apologize, because speaking of congestion, when you're born with a nose this big, and you have all of this pollen in the air, you have to excuse yourself, okay? So I apologize for that. It wasn't that your presentation wasn't important. So, as he indicated earlier, the most important part of my resume, first of all, when you get older, your resume gets longer. But really, the most important part of my resume is I am a dad of 3 children. I am a husband of 40 years with my wife, Pat. So all the other stuff is just stuff. When I die, all I want them to say is he was a good father and he was a good husband. That's how I feel about life. So let's talk about myself. About 40 years ago, a large corporation called the United States Air Force moved Pat and I out here to Tucson, Arizona. I spent the 5 years on active duty, and then decided that active duty wasn't for me, so I decided I was going to move to Chandler, Arizona. I got my first job at a small company called Space Data Corporation. Some of you might remember that company. It was out in Tempe, then became Orbital, and now Northrop Grumman. In fact, talk about 316 cycles, my son is actually working for Northrop Grumman, Space Data Organization, doing the same thing I do and left the Air Force, and that's launching rockets. And that is cool, launching rockets. But my 3 kids all went to Chandler's public schools. They all went to Chandler universities. So on Saturday morning, I have an ASU flag outside because my son went there in engineering school. I have a U of A flag outside because my son went there and majored in international politics and Mandarin. And then my daughter, who was not going to go to any school her brothers went to, that's for sure, went to NAU, and now she's in New York working for NBC television studios. So all 3 of my kids decided they were going to do different things in their lives. As I indicated, my wife and I are 40 years. We are proud grandparents. I have 2 little ones. Those of you that are grandparents, raise your hand. It's a different world. The other day, I had my granddaughter on the table, she's 3, putting her shoes on. My son walked in and said, "Dad, you never let us sit on the table." And I said to him, "You're not my granddaughter." That's simple. It's a great life, and I have a grandson. We, as I told you, I worked in industry, a lot of high-tech industry all my life, and that's something that I thought I brought to the council. Let me go back to my military background, I apologize. So I decided to join the Arizona Air National Guard. So for 25 years, which is only going to be a short time, I finally retired. I retired as a full-bird colonel from the Arizona Air National Guard. So I have a good military background. I have a mix. A lot of things I learned in the military and you learn in business is you act on fact. In business, if I don't act on fact, I lose a customer, I lose a profit. In the military, if you don't act on fact, you may lose lives. That's ingrained in me. And when I approach issues, city issues, as well as with business issues, I like to act on facts. What are the facts? I do a lot of deep dives. And Dana, I'm going to pick on you. She's our budget director, as you know. And there's no time where I've taken the next 3rd, 4th, 5th level on the budget issue. Right, Dana? For that, I thank you for answering all my questions, being patient with all those questions. But I do act on fact. I truly believe in partnerships. Whether it's the chamber, the schools, business, and I put together a lot of partnerships in my private industry, and I've learned a lot about individuals and areas, including the Chamber of Commerce. Now, I did a lot of mergers, acquisitions as well. I also did a lot of relocations. And one of the things we used to do is, first of all, we looked at a company, we say, are they profitable, and do they have enough money to get a return on my investment, before you even look at whether there's synergies and customers, markets, all that stuff like that. But we used to go to the Chamber of Commerce first. We didn't go to the mayor and council. We didn't go to other government entities. We went to the business owners. Because I would go to the business owners and we would say, "Hey, we want to relocate here. What's the environment here? Why are you successful? Why are you not successful?" And then after that, after we did our due diligence with the chamber, the business people who are nuts and bolts on the ground, then we went and talked to some of the political leaders, because obviously the political leaders have to work with you on activities. So partnerships are key to me to continue our growth and success. The other thing you find about me is I don't play the blame game. I think we're a society, there's enough blame going on in our society. I want to fix the problem, okay? Whether it's transportation, police, fire, let's sit down, fix the problem. Let's work through that issues. It's still okay. It's a little bit about me. What we should be doing, first of all, I lived in chair, like I said, for almost 35 years. It's a great city. It's an outstanding city. But even in your own business, and I challenge you, you never rest on your laurels. Never take something for granted. We have 4 Intel plants here. How about the 5th one? What are we doing in the future to work on that 5th Intel plant? What are we doing today to work on that 5th Intel plant? So we have to look at the future, start looking at doing better. We're doing a great job here today. It's not a criticism, but what can we do better? What goals can we set higher achievement? And that's something I know getting to know some of the, I worked with Kevin for several years. I worked with a few of the city staff members, getting to know Terry, some of the other council members. They are great people, and they really have their heart in Chandler, and I'm looking forward to working with them again. What are the priorities? You've probably heard this before, public safety in schools. Again, I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. Rick, since you're from New York, my accent gets to me, will you translate for these people? I appreciate that, right?
Yeah, but you're from Jersey.
But you still can handle my accent.
We can handle the accent.
Who else from, you know? Actually, I should translate for him. That's true. Going back, public safety in schools. Now, I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. There was a time in our city where I could buy a piece of property, I could build a factory, I could educate and hire the workers, and no one would go there because it wasn't safe. So you have to have safe public safety. You have to have a great police and fire department, and we do. And again, can we do better? Sure we can do better. And we should be striving to do better in those areas. Neighborhoods and quality of life. I guarantee you, if I took a survey right now, every one of you said, I came to Chandler for different reasons. Education system, great parks and recreation system, outstanding arts center, a great chamber of commerce. So the quality of life of this issue, this community, is extremely important. That is our advantage. Okay? It's not infrastructure, streets, airports. It's the quality of life. It's education. And as we go out and we start building this community, the next phase of this community, let's keep remembering quality of life is the leverage. I've been to many, many communities throughout my society, internationally as well as domestically. And if you have a great quality of life, people will not stay there. So that's our competitive advantage. All the other stuff is just stuff. Okay? And finally, economic development. That is a big area of mine. I know Jack is really big on economic. You, Rick, big on economic development. These guys, I worked with them in the past. And that has to be our driving engine, but not at all cost. Okay, we have to protect our Price Road corridor. I can't tell you how many times we've had business leaders or developers want to come in and put houses on Price Road corridor, or some other entity by preserving, being snobbish. It's not bad. Being a little snobbish is not bad, folks. Let's preserve that. That Price Road corridor is a mecca now. It's looking beautiful. The airport, a lot of pressure to put different things down there. Successful councils say no. And these councils in the past have said no. So we got to continue putting pressure on that. The downtown area, I'm telling you, it's great. I can remember coming to the city council my first few years. We were the fastest growing community for 3 years in a row. We couldn't get infrastructure fast enough. You talk about late nights, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, because of the infrastructure and citizens involved. And I also served in a council where we had a recession, where things weren't as doing well as should. But thank goodness, and thanks to foresight and the thought process we have with our city leaders, both elected and non-elected, we were able to weather that recession. So I've seen both spectrums, and I've seen growth in both spectrums. We know how to do that here in Chandler. In fact, we are the envy because we did not lay off one person when we had a recession. We did a business model, did buy out packages, like a good business person would do. And I know Rick was on the council, Jack was on the council, we had those issues too. So workforce note, we gotta continue our workforce notes, particularly in North Chandler, which I know we have a lot of good projects coming in North Chandler, and I know we'll continue working those projects. Diversify our workforce. What we're doing well and need to do better in Chandler is, we looked at our market survey, we looked at, well, what's west of the Mississippi? That was a good guideline 15, 20 years ago. How can we compete with Mesa and Nevada, Utah, California? But our apertures have gotten so much wider with Intel being here, Microsoft, Microchip, GM, all the large, Wells Fargo, international banking business. Our aperture has to be wider than that. No longer can it be east-west Mississippi. It has to be Pacific Ocean and Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico. What's out there beyond those bodies of water? And let's start recruiting those individuals. And let's leverage the CEO of Intel, leverage the Wells Fargo CEOs to say, hey, what do you have out? What are you hearing out there that we can bring in these new corporations coming into the city? They'll tell us. When I worked for Honeywell, I can't tell you the time. One time I was up in Toronto, we had a meeting, a business meeting, and a small corporation who was a customer of Honeywell wanted to move to Arizona. And we were able to work with that corporation. Now, I don't know the final result because I've left, but my point was, just through those dialogue meetings, we were able to pick up a company internationally to come to Arizona. So again, we have to start thinking beyond just Mississippi or the local areas. We have to think beyond the coastlines. Chandler Fashion Center. We've done a lot of good things on Chandler Fashion Center. And again, some gentlemen in this room here, Kevin and Jeff, Terry, we've done a great job on Fashion Center. But again, I look at Biltmore, and they just did a remodeling of Biltmore and Scottsdale Fashion Center. What kind of pressure can we put on the Chandler folks that own the Fashion Center to be able to keep that a viable economical entity? Now, we just got a new business in there. It's pretty cool. I like it. I can't wait to go do it with my grandkids. Start coloring things. That's cool. I like coloring, right? But let's start thinking about what do we want to do for the unique stuff that wants to come to Chandler, so we keep that refreshed. We put the housing around it. We put more hotels in that area. Again, as a business traveler, I love to go walk from my hotel to the fashion center. So that's good stuff. Let's keep doing that. Vacant corners or redevelopment. Again, growing up in North New Jersey, we did a lot of redevelopment. We have to take a hard look at what we're doing in our vacant corners, and we got some plans for that. So I'm glad we're doing that. And of course, we got a bunch of vacant buildings coming up on Price Road Corridor and at the airport. What are we doing to get those filled? Are we working with the right entities, the chamber and other entities to make this happen? So again, that's my vision for Chandler. I don't think it's unique. I don't think it's earth-shattering. But I think the key here is we want to continue growing on what we've laid the foundation here. Let's get the next generation. Let's get the next business plans out looking out there. And let's look forward to the future. What questions do you have of me?